Nobody sat you down and explained this. Not a doctor rushing between appointments, not a well-meaning friend telling you to stay positive, not anyone who watched you carry exhaustion like a second skin and thought to ask why. The tightness in your shoulders, the ache that settles in without explanation, the tiredness that never quite lifts. What if none of it is random? What if it isn't just age, or stress, or bad luck, but something closer to a signal? Consider a different possibility. The body you've spent years arguing with, dosing, and dismissing has actually been trying to get your attention the entire time. Every strange symptom, every flare-up with no clear cause might not be your body falling apart. It might be your body pushing something to the surface, handing you an envelope you never opened. This idea has deep roots in depth psychology, most famously associated with Soul Journey, who spent much of his life studying the unconscious mind. Dreams, symbols, the parts of ourselves we'd rather not look at directly. Jung didn't treat the psyche as separate from the body. He saw a person as one interconnected system, where what gets pushed out of conscious awareness doesn't vanish. It has to go somewhere. Out of that broader body of thought, a popular modern interpretation has grown, that the body keeps its own kind of record. Not of accomplishments or milestones, but of the feelings you didn't have room to feel at the time. The anger you swallowed, the grief you never let anyone witness, the fear you couldn't admit even to yourself. In this view, physical tension can become a kind of storage unit for emotional material that never got processed. And here's the more hopeful half of the idea. If the body can hold on to old pain, it may also be capable of releasing it, not through force or willpower, but through something almost embarrassingly simple: attention, acknowledgement, a kind of honest conversation with yourself that most of us were never taught and instinctively resist, because it asks us to stop performing wellness and actually check in. That resistance is worth noticing rather than pushing past instantly. If the idea of talking to your own body, out loud, with tenderness, makes you recoil a little, that reaction itself might be telling you something. Maybe it's unfamiliar. Maybe it feels silly. Maybe it feels too vulnerable. Whatever the reason, the discomfort is information, not a stop sign. None of this is a substitute for medical care, and there's no controlled evidence that emotional dialogue alone cures physical disease. That's an important caveat before going further. But as a practice for building self-compassion and body awareness, many people find real value in it. So take this less as a clinical claim and more as an invitation. What if, instead of treating your body as an inconvenience to manage, you treated it as a companion that's been trying to talk to you for years? Jung spent decades listening to patients, to dreams, to the symbols that kept resurfacing across different lives and different cultures. Over time, he noticed something that many later therapists and researchers have echoed in various forms. Physical discomfort often clustered around emotional patterns that people had pushed out of conscious awareness. This observation, that unprocessed feeling can show up as physical tension, has since been explored more formally in fields like psychosomatic medicine and mind-body research, even if the specific practices described here are a modern extrapolation rather than a documented Jungian method. The idea goes further, though, into something more actionable. If suppressed emotion can contribute to physical strain, then deliberate, compassionate attention might help ease it. Not as a cure, but as a form of care. The practice built from this idea is sometimes called body dialogue. The simple act of speaking, out loud, to a part of yourself that hurts, as though it were a listener rather than a malfunctioning machine. Here's roughly how it works. You place a hand over the area of your body that's tense, tired, or in pain. Your stomach, your chest, your lower back, wherever the discomfort lives. You approach it the way you might approach a frightened child, not with judgment, but with patience. You might say something like, "I notice you. I'm sorry I've spent so long ignoring or criticizing you. I'm here now, and I want to understand what you've been carrying." The specificity matters more than the words themselves. A generic script, repeated without real reflection, tends to accomplish little. The practice asks you to actually name what you think the tension might be connected to. If it's your shoulders, you might ask, "What have you been holding for me?" If it's your stomach, you might ask what you've been unable to digest, literally or emotionally. The goal isn't to diagnose yourself medically through this exercise, but to create space for reflection you might otherwise skip. Physical contact seems to matter in these practices. Not because touch is magic, but because it signals safety to your nervous system in a way that thinking alone doesn't. A hand resting gently on your chest or stomach while you speak tends to feel different, more grounding, than simply thinking the same words silently. Advocates of this approach suggest even a few minutes a day, done consistently, can shift how you relate to chronic tension over time, less as an enemy to defeat, more as a part of yourself asking for acknowledgement. Whether or not you believe in any deeper metaphysical claim behind it, the exercise itself is a form of mindfulness. Noticing sensation, naming emotion, and offering yourself compassion instead of frustration. This idea also connects to something wider Jung explored: the notion that unprocessed experience doesn't stay contained in one generation. He suggested that children often absorb the emotional weight their parents never had the chance to work through. What that means for something like body dialogue is this: some of the tension you're carrying may not even be entirely your own story, but an inherited pattern worth gently investigating rather than assuming you're broken for having it. If speaking to a part of your body feels vulnerable, speaking to your entire reflection tends to feel harder still. This is the premise behind a practice sometimes called mirror work. Standing in front of a mirror, looking directly into your own eyes, and speaking a sentence of unconditional acceptance using your own name. Something like, "I accept you completely, exactly as you are, the wins and the mistakes, the wounds and the strengths." It sounds almost too simple to matter. In practice, many people find it surprisingly difficult. Eyes tend to drift away from the reflection. Voices catch. Some people find themselves unexpectedly emotional partway through. That reaction, when it happens, usually isn't really about vanity or appearance. It's closer to confronting years of quiet self-criticism all at once. The internal narration most of us run constantly and rarely examine directly. A mirror has a way of making avoidance obvious. You can't easily look away from your own eyes and pretend you don't notice you're looking away. Some versions of this practice combine mirror work with the body dialogue described earlier. Standing at the mirror, placing a hand on the part of your body you're focused on, and speaking to both your reflection and that physical area at once. The combination is meant to reinforce a single message: acceptance, not conditional on fixing anything first. This ties into a broader interpretive framework sometimes used in these practices. The idea of the body as a kind of communication system, where different areas of physical strain loosely correspond to different emotional or life themes. Stiff joints get associated with resistance to change. Vision trouble gets associated with things a person doesn't want to look at directly, and so on. It's worth being clear-eyed here. These correspondences aren't medical facts, and treating them as literal diagnostic tools isn't supported by evidence. They function more like a reflective prompt, a way to ask yourself, what could this be about, rather than a definitive answer. One caution worth repeating from this tradition itself: technique without real feeling tends to fall flat. Reciting a sentence mechanically, without any actual reflection behind it, rarely shifts anything. The value in mirror work, if there is one, comes from genuinely sitting with the discomfort it brings up rather than rushing through the words to get to the end of the exercise. For some people, this practice will feel meaningful. For others, it will feel awkward or performative, and that's a reasonable reaction too. Not everyone processes emotion through the same channel, and mirror work isn't a required step towards self-compassion. It's one tool among many, useful mainly as a way to notice where your self-talk has become harsher than you'd ever allow it to be towards someone else. Many traditions of psychological and spiritual practice converge on a similar point. Carrying resentment tends to cost the person holding it more than the person it's directed at. This is the idea behind a forgiveness-focused practice. Not forgiveness as something you grant the other person for their benefit, but as something you do for your own sake, to stop carrying weight that no longer serves any purpose. One version of this practice involves writing down the name of someone who hurt you, placing a hand over your heart and speaking something like, "I release this. You're free, and so am I." Whatever kept us bound together in this way is done. What's left between us now is peace. The point isn't reconciliation with the actual person, and it doesn't require their presence, awareness, or even that they still be alive. It's an internal act aimed at loosening a grip that's been draining your own energy. This kind of work rarely resolves in a single attempt. It tends to happen in layers. You release one version of a resentment, and a deeper, related one surfaces behind it. That's a normal part of the process rather than a sign that the exercise failed. Each pass tends to lighten the load a little, even if it doesn't erase it entirely. There's also a smaller scale version worth mentioning, a nightly practice of reviewing minor frustrations from the day, a short-tempered exchange, an irritation, a disappointment, and consciously letting them go before sleep rather than letting them accumulate. The logic here isn't that skipping this ritual will make you sick. It's simply that unexamined daily friction tends to build up mentally, and a brief nightly check-in can prevent that buildup from becoming a habit of chronic low-grade stress. If any of this feels relevant, it's worth asking yourself honestly, is there someone, including yourself, that you've been holding at arm's length emotionally? Not to force forgiveness before you're ready, but simply to notice the weight and consider whether you're the one carrying it longest. It's worth being honest that forgiveness work like this is a personal, reflective practice, not a medical intervention, and it won't resolve every conflict or trauma on its own. Some situations genuinely call for professional support, whether that's therapy, mediation, or simply time. But as a private, low-stakes way to examine what you're still holding on to and why, it's a reasonable place to start. One of the more emotionally direct practices in this tradition involves what's often called inner child work, a way of addressing the parts of yourself shaped by experiences from childhood that were never fully processed at the time they happened. A common version of this exercise: find a photo of yourself as a young child, ideally somewhere between toddlerhood and early elementary age. Hold it. Look at the expression, the eyes, whatever you can read into that moment. Then speak to that child directly, as the adult you've since become, offering the reassurance or protection that circumstances may not have allowed for at the time. Something like, "I'm sorry, no one was fully able to protect you the way you needed. I'm sorry you had to handle things that were too big for you. But I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. You're safe." The reasoning behind this practice draws on a widely accepted idea in psychology, even outside Jungian frameworks, that early emotional experiences can shape adult reactions in ways that feel disproportionate to a present situation. A minor conflict at work triggers outsized anger. A small rejection triggers overwhelming fear. In many cases, that intensity isn't really about the present moment at all. It's an old pattern getting activated by something that resembles an earlier wound, even faintly. Inner child work, in this framing, is a way of directly addressing that pattern rather than just reacting to its symptoms. By consciously offering comfort to the part of yourself still holding on to an old experience, some people find they're able to respond to present situations with a bit more steadiness because the old alarm isn't firing unchecked. This is genuinely tender territory, and it's worth a caveat. For people with significant childhood trauma, this kind of exercise can bring up intense emotion, and doing it without support from a therapist, counselor, or trusted person isn't necessarily advisable. If you try this and it opens something bigger than you expected, that's a reasonable moment to pause and consider bringing in professional support rather than pushing through alone. For others, it can simply be a quiet, private moment of self-compassion, a way of acknowledging that the person you are now has resources, safety, and stability that weren't always available earlier in life, and that it's okay to extend that stability backward, at least symbolically, to the version of yourself that needed it most. Part 6. Building a daily practice. Everything covered so far can be pulled together into a short daily routine, not as a guaranteed cure for anything, but as a structured way to build self-compassion and body awareness over time. Here's one way it might be organized, adapted loosely into a 20-minute sequence. Minutes 1, 3. Gratitude. Sit quietly. Instead of focusing on what hurts, notice what's working. Your heartbeat, your breath, the simple fact that your body has kept functioning through everything you've put it through. This isn't about ignoring pain. It's about starting from a place other than frustration. Minutes 4, 8. Body dialogue. Place a hand on the area that's tense or uncomfortable. Ask what it might be holding. Speak to it honestly, in your own words, rather than a memorized script. Minutes 9, 13. Mirror work. Stand in front of a mirror, if you have one nearby, and speak a short sentence of self-acceptance while looking at your own reflection. If a mirror isn't available, this can be adapted by speaking the same words to yourself with eyes closed. Minutes 14, 18. Forgiveness. Bring to mind anyone, including yourself, that you're still holding resentment toward. Speak a brief release, even if it doesn't feel fully true yet. The words tend to catch up with the feeling over repeated practice, not the other way around. Minutes 19, 20. A moment of intention. Picture yourself doing something you enjoy, feeling well, feeling capable. Let that image settle before you open your eyes and move on with your day. None of this replaces medical treatment, and if you're dealing with a real physical or mental health concern, that always warrants a conversation with an actual doctor or therapist rather than substituting a self-talk practice in its place. What this kind of routine can offer is something more modest but still meaningful. A regular pause to actually notice how you're doing, instead of moving through the day disconnected from your own body until something forces you to pay attention. The broader point underneath all of this, whether or not you adopt the specific exercises, is a shift in posture. Not body as obstacle, but body as messenger. Not illness as failure, but discomfort as information worth listening to, even when the answer isn't obvious right away. If nothing else, it's worth asking yourself, today, is there a part of you, physical or emotional, that you've been quietly ignoring? And what might change if, just for a few minutes, you decided to listen instead?